We're ready now to create a collective data assessment in eLumen. Hopefully by now you've had a chance to navigate a little bit, find your way around, and now we're going to go ahead and create that data assessment. I'm going to start by going into eLumen through what I consider to be the fastest way, and that is from the Bakersfield College website. I'm going to click on Inside BC, and then once I'm logged in there, I'll click on Tools, and you'll see right here eLumen. So it should log you in automatically if you signed into Inside BC. There's a chance you might need to log in right there, but otherwise at this point you are logged into eLumen, and now we will create our collective data assessment. Before I get started with my data assessment, I do want to check just a couple of things, and this is a practice that you should do every time you log into eLumen. That is, first I want to check my role, and you should make sure your name is there. There's no good reason why it wouldn't be, but just double check that. And if you want to create an assessment, what you want to do is be faculty. For some of you, that's the only role you have, so you don't have to worry about it. But in this drop-down menu, just make sure faculty is what's selected. And if that is what's selected, this should be similar to the screen that you see when you log in. The next thing you want to do is check your discipline or in eLumen department, which is right next to that. If you only teach in one department, this won't be an issue for you, but if you have classes in several departments, just check the drop-down menu and select the discipline you'd like to start working in. The last thing you want to check is your term. You might be entering data for a previous term or for the one that you're in currently. Just go ahead and double check this. You'll see I only have spring 2018, but if you have previous terms, then you just want to check that. And then navigate to the course that you want to put assessment data in for. So let's say I teach several sections of English B1A, but right now I'm going to go ahead and create this assessment in this section, in section 7. So the first thing I'm going to do is click on this Add Assessment button. So I go ahead and do that, just press that button, and you'll see a screen pop up that looks like this. The very first choice you have here is individual or collective. Now individual lets you put data information in for each individual student that you're doing. Collective kind of summarizes your assessment data. Today what I'm showing you is collective. So I'm going to go ahead and click that button, and things will change just slightly when I do. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to come up with an assessment name. Now, this may not seem like a big deal, but this is actually pretty important, especially if you plan on sharing your assessments with other staff members, or even if you plan on using these assessments in subsequent semesters. You want to name this in a way that you know which SLOs you are assessing. So for this one, for English B1A, I'm just going to say I am assessing SLO number 1. So I'll go ahead and put that here. In my assessment description, I want to enter the name of the tool that I'm going to use. If I'm going to use a test, I might put the questions that I'm assessing. If I'm using a specific essay or a specific project, whatever it is that I'm using, and again, this is for you and for others that you share it with to know what you use to assess this data. So I'm going to say essay number 2 is what I'm using to assess this data. And then assessment type, you are almost always going to choose summative SLO assessment because that is really what we are using to assess is a summative assessment. So you can skip all of this information here in the middle. You don't want to make it formative. If you want to make notes on each individual student, you can do that here. It's more difficult when you choose collective, so probably not a good option when you're doing a collective assessment. And then please leave the reflections template as the default because this is what the assessment team has decided we want the information we want to collect for the reflection. Now, this may seem counterintuitive, but we're going to put the exact same information that we used for assessment name and description in our activity name and description, just because of the way this shows up in eLumen. It shows up in different places, and so we want to be able to see that information. So I am really just copying in activity name and description what I put up here in assessment name and description. And then as you come down here, you're going to notice that you can't really make changes to these two options, so you can just leave those the way they are. Now, number of SLOs, that's just how many SLOs are you assessing, and that's how many lines it's going to give you on your rubric. I said that this is SLO number 1, so that means I'm only going to assess one SLO. and I will click Generate Rubric Template. Okay, and then scroll down a little bit and you will see here's what my rubric looks like. I can make changes here if this text, attribute, skill, knowledge, behavior is highly developed and consistently performed. If that doesn't work for me and how I'm assessing it, I can change that, or I can leave it just as it is, and that's perfectly fine as well. You'll notice, hang on, I'm going to go back to that in a second. You'll notice that we have these three options here: exceeds expectations, meets expectations, does not meet. Those are not things that you can change. That's going to be the default every time you generate your rubric template. The last thing I need to do right here is choose the SLO. I said I was assessing SLO number 1, so I click Link SLO, and my SLOs will pop up. Now here's an important point that you need to know. These SLOs are not necessarily in order 1 through 5. So you need to double check that to be sure. You can check that on your COR. If you've got your SLOs on your syllabus and you know they're right, you can check them there. Please don't just assume that because they're in order, this order, that means they are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in fact, I believe my SLO number 1 is in the right order here, but I will double check that to be sure. Now, my options right here, and you want to really be sure before you say save or save and add to the library that this is an assessment that you want to create, because it does become more difficult to delete them after you enter assessment data or after you enter reflection data. So I'm going to double check it, make sure that I'm happy with it. And then because I want to be able to use this in the future and I want my colleagues to be able to use this in the future when they assess SLO number 1, I'm going to save it and add it to the library. That way other people can find it as well. So I click Save and Add to the library. Okay, and I'm going to go down. It was right here. SLO number 1, essay number 2. That's how I know this is the one that I created, because of the names that I gave. And you'll notice it says activity name and description, not the assessment name and description. That's why we put the same thing in both of those categories. And it's right there. It's ready for me to assess.